None of us felt personally threatened by Sauron. The Night King and his army of the undead, those weren't really going to get us either. And so when people conjure up these stories about AI overlords destroying all of us, it's very similar to that. It's a story you can get very excited about, you can say you're getting frightened about, but we all know we're going to go home and there's no AI overlord outside that's going to get us.
Welcome to GeekWire. I'm Todd Bishop. This week we're featuring highlights from my recent live interview with Nathan Myhrvold, CEO of Intellectual Ventures and the former Chief Technology Officer at Microsoft. Since leaving Microsoft, he has worked across fields including energy, science, physics, paleontology, photography, and innovative cuisine. In this conversation, recorded at Town Hall Seattle as part of GeekWire's Microsoft at 50 event, Myhrvold shares his thoughts on the rise of AI, his longtime collaboration with Bill Gates, the future of energy, the secrets of Microsoft's success, and what's next in his Modernist Cuisine book series.
Nathan, you were at Microsoft in a really pivotal era for the company from 1986 to 2000. And so you're, I think, in a unique position to answer the question, what is the significance of this company, Microsoft, in modern business history?
Well, just even beyond business history, we live in a technological world. We all interact with technology constantly. And Microsoft was an absolutely fundamental, foundational part of that. We have this motto, a computer in every desk and in every home. And so many people give us crap about that. They say, oh, you're a nerd. You think that everyone needs the stuff that you do, but we don't. And I'll never have a computer at home. I'll never have one in my pocket. You do. And the world's a better place for having been empowered by that. But for that to happen, you needed there to be standards in software that could allow the hardware people to innovate as much as they possibly can, and software to innovate separately from that, and yet the two things be compatible. And that's what Microsoft ultimately was about.
Can you think about your favorite memory with Bill and tell us about that? I know that there's been some things about you calculating things about Bill's future and Microsoft's future.
Yeah, in 1987, I told him that Microsoft would be the most valuable company on earth and he'd be the richest man in the world. And it would take 10 years. And I was totally wrong. It took 3. It took 3 for an interesting reason. I had not figured that Sam Walton would die. Because Sam Walton was the richest guy around, and Walmart is still a fantastic company. But he was of a different generation, so he couldn't last forever, and I had not factored that in. People would say, oh, Microsoft can't keep growing this way. And I said, no, actually, I think $1 trillion market cap is very reasonable.
Trillion.
Well, because I looked at the most comparable period, which was the early part of industrialization in the United States. I took the market cap of U.S. Steel as a percentage of the New York Stock Exchange, and $1 trillion was easily possible. And once you get to $1 trillion, it's probably more than that because the rest of the economy will grow. I remember Bill said, well, you're new here, so I'll forgive the stupidity of your remark. That was the type of supportive feedback it sounds funny to say that, but it did actually make me try to do better, but I also thought, but I bet I'm right.
Are you sure that's how Bill put it?
I'm pretty sure.
You didn't say it was the stupidest thing that he'd ever heard?
That was, for a long time, that was almost became a running joke, where this would happen in a meeting, and I said, oh my God, another personal best. How can I keep doing it? After Bill went to the foundation, he tried to stop saying that. It was a big thing.
He tried.
Well, so we were in a big foundation meeting, and Jeff Rakes was running the foundation at the time. So Jeff and I are sitting there, and someone said something that was just incredible. And Bill, and he's stuck. And so Jeff and I said, come on, Bill, we know what you want to say.
I've heard that in some of the meetings that he's having now and in some of his advisory roles, they almost sort of look at him and like let him do this as one of his greatest hits, something like this. But in fact, you underestimated Microsoft's market value. Now, of course, you could adjust for inflation, but it's $3 trillion now. I mean, it's not just $1 trillion.
Sure, but that was also a longer time frame than I was projecting.
Yes, yes. So, Nathan, I know you've also been looking ahead, and obviously you're involved in fields like energy. Obviously, you pay close attention to theoretical physics and quantum. But let's talk a little bit about AI. Mm-hmm. What is your take on AI today and where it's headed, and how that plays out in the context of the computer science that you've done over your career?
Well, there's a persistent thing with the tech industry that people overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term. So they think, oh my God, by next Thursday, everything is going to be just amazing. And it's a good pitch if you're trying to pitch your company and so forth. And in fact, pundits almost compete for saying more outrageous things like that. But in the long run, I think AI has tremendous potential. And I would put AI today a lot like personal computers in the 1980s. Meaning, it's good for a bunch of things. I'm not saying it's bad, but I think its potential is enormously higher. And that will require a whole lot of work by a whole lot of folks.
So are you concerned or are you heartened by that prospect of what AI could become for the world?
Almost entirely heartened. There's a class of human ideas that people just love having, and yet they have a history of always being wrong. And that never stops the next person from having that idea. So the notion that progress is going to destroy us has come up over and over again throughout history. The Luddites. The Luddites were about a group in England that was mad about something called a stocking frame. It was a frame that you'd use for knitting stockings. And they thought this was going to destroy England as a country, and well, it didn't happen. Amusingly, they started destroying these stocking frames. Parliament freaked out. They actually made it a death penalty to destroy a stocking frame.
Wow.
But it turns out only about 6 people were executed for that. The majority of the people who damaged stocking frames were sentenced to Australia. And it actually worked out pretty good for them.
And AI?
Oh, yes, AI. So, oh, Todd. AI is, what's amazing is that fairly simple techniques and tremendous amounts of computing power actually achieved something that is able to mimic most parts of human language. That's almost unbelievable. And, they gave a Nobel Prize for the machine learning guys, but they should have given a Nobel Prize for this specific thing, which is the idea that the richness of human language could in fact be done in a very, very simple, ultimately, obviously there's lots of complex parts around it, but it's still a simple model that teaches itself so long as you feed it every book on earth. Now, that's also the limitation. So none of us here learn to read or learn to do anything by reading every book on earth. Okay, we couldn't possibly. And that's largely because we have this very facile ability to generate new abstractions on the fly. If I call this thing a widget, and I said there's something about the widget, we can talk about widgets, and you'll know I'm referring to that, and we can reason about it. And that facility to create a new abstract concept, imbue it with meaning and properties, and then reason about it, AI doesn't have that yet. That's why we have to train it by having every example you can possibly imagine of different combinations of words. But I think they'll get there, but that's at least one miracle that needs to be figured out. And I variously have thought there was like 3 to 5 miracles that need to be done. Who knows? And that could happen tomorrow, or maybe it already happened tonight and they just haven't told us. Or it could be it could take another 10 years. But that, and even more important than that, maybe for most people, is the work of harnessing that power to do something for you. And that's what application programming is about. It's about saying, well, gee, I can move bits around on the screen, but now I can have Microsoft Word put nice letters together and have fonts, and I can make documents, and I can make presentations. All of that allowed us to harness a basic capability to a task we do. Well, today, AI is useful at some tasks. If you want to write limericks, man, there's no better way. There's absolutely no better. Or ask for a Shakespearean sonnet and then say, as said by a pirate. And it's shocking how good it will do. And I don't mean to trivialize it by saying that, but there are a variety of things that harnessing that is, we've only scratched the surface.
We'll have more with former Microsoft CTO Nathan Myhrvold after this.
I'm Brian Westbrook with GeekWire Studios. Money Hacks presented by BECU. On this episode, we're talking about those with irregular sources of income. Now, what does that mean, Stacey Black?
Yeah, it could be if you do freelance work, contract, or seasonal work. It's whenever you don't have income that's a regular, steady amount that you can expect.
And that means a lot of challenges, everything from healthcare to how to save. You've got a lot of great tips in this episode of Money Hacks. We'll check it out at geekwire.com/BECU. I'm Brian Westbrook, joined by Stacey Black, lead financial educator for BECU. Check it out.
Listen to the full interview and find more episodes of Money Hacks at geekwire.com/BECU and find more information at becu.org.
So are you saying, did I hear you correctly, that we're 3 to 5 miracles away from AI that's as powerful or as intelligent as humans?
Yes.
And you think that could happen in 10 years?
Well, everyone wants to know when it will happen. But the fact is, you couldn't have guessed 2 years ago, you wouldn't have guessed where we were today.
Yeah.
There was a small set of people at OpenAI and at Microsoft who believed a crazy proposition, which is if only we pour billions of dollars of computing at it, we'll get there. Now, they had some reasons. But people had tried that same thing with AI many times since the 1960s, and it had not been successful. So it wasn't a foregone conclusion, but that's the kind of calculated risk you have to take. And that's partially how Microsoft has gotten to be in one of the best positions in AI, because they were able to make that calculated risk.
You mentioned OpenAI, and I've been thinking about this in the context. I went back and read your original Microsoft research plan, and I think this is important to note. Microsoft Research exists today because largely you made the case for it internally in this very well-reasoned document, but you barely mentioned AI in that document at the time, or at least forms of it. But
the thing about AI is that it's gone through cycles of being in fashion and out of fashion, almost like clothes do that. But AI would have a boom cycle where there'd be some minor breakthrough. People say, oh my God, it's going to happen. And you'd know you were in the tail end of the boom cycle when every product, no matter how dumb it was, someone said, it has AI technology. And then there'd be this crash where people say, oh my God, AI is a bunch of bullshit. And then during that crash, people would get some other AI thing to work, but they wouldn't call it AI. So like when natural language understanding and parsing became successful, they called it natural language understanding. That used to be AI until it worked. But it worked during a critical phase when calling it AI would have been negative. And the same thing with speech recognition. A bunch of machine learning is called machine learning, not AI. Why? Well, because that was from one of those eras when it was out of fashion.
so if you look back at that original Microsoft research plan, it basically made the case for the need for internal innovation.
Yes.
And how do you view the OpenAI partnership and the pragmatic bet that Microsoft has made on external innovation to fuel a large portion of its future in that context?
So another part of that same memo says, we will never hire all the smart people on Earth. There will always be somebody outside the company who has a better idea than what we have. So besides doing all of that internal innovation, which we have to do for a bunch of reasons, we also need to keep our ear to the ground and say, when is somebody else having a better idea? And then we have to figure out how we can learn from that, including doing business deals. At the time that they first did the big deal with OpenAI, I think OpenAI had 40 employees. And Microsoft had, at the time, you could have argued there were more than 1,000, maybe some people have told me 2,000 people, who would have said they were working on some aspect of AI. And they decided to give billions of dollars to an outside company. And that is the kind of calculated risk that totally makes sense if you think those other guys are going to win, and they bet on the right one.
Yeah. So you're not worried about AI from the perspective of human existence and the potential existential crisis.
So here's the other idea that humans love. We love having really scary, nasty villains that aren't actually real. So Sauron, okay? None of us felt personally threatened by Sauron. The Night King and his army of the undead, those weren't really going to get us either. And so when people conjure up these stories about AI overlords destroying all of us, it's very similar to that. It's a story you can get very excited about, you can say you're getting frightened about, but really, we all know we're going to go home and there's no AI overlord outside that's going to get us.
What about from the perspective of the environment and energy? Obviously, next generation nuclear is something that you pay very close attention to through some of your partnerships and your work with Bill.
But Bill's the chairman of TerraPower.
Yes.
I'm the vice chairman.
Yes.
I handle the vice in the company.
Yes.
So here's an interesting statistic, which I think puts a lot of the energy crisis that we're in perspective. So Americans use about 12 kilowatts of energy. It means it's like you had 12 toasters running constantly. 7 by 24. And that's all the energy, whether it's not literally in toasters, that's the energy in your car and the lights. And take all that energy and add it up. The average of the world is about 2,500. Those people with the 2,500, they all want to do 12,000. Plus, we want to go from 12,000 to a higher number because these data centers take energy. That's a brand new thing. No one would have said data centers were a major part of the utility equation, but they are. And they'll be only more so going forward. So you have to think of a world in which the total energy demand in this next century grows by a factor of 5 to 10. So when someone says, we should be 10% efficiency here, 10% efficiency here, hey, that's great, you should do it. But that won't solve the problem because the poor world wants to get rich and the rich world wants to do more things that require power, like AI.
And so that leaves you in a place of not being worried or worried about what's next in terms of energy consumption.
If we don't find good ways to build that, we'll really be in trouble. And so that's why we invented a new type of fission reactor. I'm one of the inventors of the TerraPower reactor. And we have a deal to build one, actually two, in Wyoming, and we're designing it right now. And I hope that there's lots of other companies working on other kinds of fission reactors and other kinds of fusion reactors and so forth. I hope they're all successful because we need to both replace what we already have, but also grow the world's energy supply by a large factor. In parts, the rest of the world can have the lifestyle we have today, and in part so we can continue to do better.
After the break, Nathan Myhrvold's 2,500-page pastry book.
Catch us up just briefly, if you can, on what's new in your world. Are you applying AI in any of your projects in paleontology or anything related to your work? And what's exciting you these days?
Well, I do a lot of stuff.
Yes, you do.
I'm writing a really big book on pastry. So another big 2,500-page book on... literally this last week, I said to someone, I'm writing a big book on pastry, and they immediately said, it must be hard writing on pastry. And I didn't know if they were pulling my leg or what. But so we're doing that, and we do use AI in that. For that project, we've got collected a database of thousands of recipes, so that when we go to a particular thing like chocolate chip cookies, we have more than 1,000 recipes. We can then analyze them statistically and figure out, why are there so many recipes? What would the best one be like? Or how are they differ? AI, I also use quite a bit in, I do research, a bunch of math research these days, also a bunch of paleontology. And so I use it quite a bit in the research, but there's a funny thing, I'll ask it about something and it'll say, oh, here's how this is all done. And then I'll say, oh, but I think this assumption isn't necessary and you could go do it. And ChatGPT always says, oh, you're absolutely right.
Brilliant.
I think, oh my God, it's learned how to butter me up.
So as you reflect on your tenure at Microsoft, and I know you still pay close attention to the company, where do you see Microsoft's strengths and its weaknesses in this emerging world? And what are you going to be watching most closely as the company embarks on its next 50 years?
Well, Microsoft has been an incredible meritocracy. One of the things that caused me to sell my company to Bill and Steve was that they would admit they were wrong. It's very hard for some people, particularly if you're a big shot CEO, to say something and have a junior person in the room say that's wrong and admit it. But if you're like Bill felt it would be even more embarrassing to not admit it, so he would. That's fantastic. So we hired lots of people from lots of backgrounds. We did a whole variety of things, and those values are still fundamentally in the company. And that's what's allowed Microsoft to continue to be relevant. Lots of all of the important companies that were competitors of Microsoft when I was first started anyway, they're almost all gone. Even companies that 10 years ago or 15 years ago, everyone thought were going to eclipse Microsoft and Microsoft even also ran, a lot of those have stalled out. So Microsoft has continued to innovate, and I think both the opportunities to innovate and the necessity to innovate for the local economy, for the global economy, for empowering people, I think that means Microsoft will absolutely have a mandate for the next 50 years.
Well, Nathan Myhrvold, thank you very much for joining us. This has been great.
Thank you.
Nathan Myhrvold is CEO of Intellectual Ventures and former Chief Technology Officer at Microsoft. He spoke at Town Hall Seattle on March 20th as part of GeekWire's Microsoft at 50 event. See the show notes for links to related coverage. We will be back in your podcast feed on Monday night this week with a special episode featuring Melinda French Gates talking with my colleague Lisa Stifler about her new book, The Next Day. Curt Milton edited this episode. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop. Thanks for listening to the GeekWire podcast.